Well, today I'm going to share more of my thoughts with you about moving ourselves and our UU culture to be more equitable and inclusive, diverse and just. A reminder that this is a commitment for the long haul because no system of oppression or power or harm can be righted or repaired or restored to wholeness in a few simple steps, a couple of pieces of handy legislation, or a minimal investment of time and energy. But the long-term nature of this work doesn't let us off the hook for what we can and should be doing and must do now to take steps to implement our UU 8th principle, to dismantle systems of oppression, and we have work to do. Each of us experiences, interprets life from our own experience and location, our perspectives. I'm a cisgendered white woman, educated and living a sort of middle-class lifestyle in a first world country in an urban setting. Each of us must define the characteristics of our own worldview so that we understand how our life circumstances frame and define our personal viewpoints. We need to know what lenses and perspectives we see the world through. And further, just so I'm clear, I am speaking primarily to folks who, like me, share the perspective of someone who is white identified. And while I can develop empathy, and while I can become more educated and aware, while I can seek to become an ally and support to those who are experiencing oppression, injustice, and inequality, I must remain aware that my skin color provides a degree of privilege and protection from some of life's existential turmoils. And like many of you, I just want you to remember, I'm on a journey of learning and change, but I am not presenting myself as an expert or a done deal on this process. I think it will last forever. Some of you know, some of you don't know, I am originally from Oregon on the west coast of the US. I've been in Canada for almost 14 years now, and I have become a dual citizen. It is our intent, my husband and I, to make Canada our home for the rest of our lives. Now, it might surprise you to know that I've known that I wanted to be Canadian since I was a little kid and visited British Columbia. I don't know what happened, but something when I crossed the border and we went to those great museums and we saw all those people and we went to those amazing places just made me feel at home. It seemed to me that there was a different approach to life that was focused on the well-being of all the community instead of emphasizing the individual, which I've always found problematic about my US home. Now, over the years, I learned more and continued to feel a pull toward Canada. I even got engaged in my mid-20s to the wrong person just because he lived in Winnipeg. And I'm so glad we didn't get married. Because I don't want to live in Winnipeg, there's too much snow. But I got the chance to be Canadian when I was called to the Hamilton pulpit, and I haven't looked back. Now, I am aware of Canada's history and challenges, and when I got here, I was really taken aback one day when someone said to me, "Aren't you glad you're not in the US anymore, where they have all those horrible race problems? We don't have those issues here." Trying not to make that facial expression I just made. I thought, what? Are you not aware of the history of your First Nations people? Have you never heard of the disproportionate number of people of color in your prisons? In your court system? Dealing with your police? The statistics on who is economically disadvantaged in Canada do not indicate that everything's dandy here. Really? But my response was, oh. And what makes you think that? When systems of privilege and oppression have been in place and in practice as long as white supremacy culture has, it can become almost invisible to those it benefits. Actions that are positive for some and disempower others become the norm, and we don't question the rightness of it anymore. And we get lulled into thinking that it must be okay because it's the way we've always done things. So yes, I am glad that I am not in the US anymore. But I'm also aware that we have work to do in Canada to address racial disparity, to redress years of abominable treatment of the Indigenous people and other people of color who are here, and to create and carry out justice equitably and ensure that every Canadian enjoys a high quality of life. So let me tell you a little bit about my early years in Oregon. Now, in the 1800s, when Oregon was a territory, there were laws in place forbidding African Americans from settling there. They strove to keep out people of Asian heritage as well. And while these exclusionary provisions were reversed when Oregon became a state, the very white appearance of Oregon remained, and it is still demographically true to this day. It might interest you to know that Oregon was the western headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan in the 20s and 30s, and that it was an organization that was highly visible and powerful and politically active. In the 1940s, blues musician, blues legend, Muddy Waters, played a gig in Salem, Oregon, the capital, and after his performance, a fellow named Mark Hatfield, who was a student at the time and later became the state's governor and senator, had to drive Mr. Waters out of town to find a place to stay overnight because there was no hotel that would rent to him. Not a pretty history in my state of origin. I knew 2 black kids in my high school, a couple of young folks from a Pakistani family. Their dad was the head of the state mental institution. There was an Asian kid, and there were lots of Mexicans. As an agricultural economy, Oregon relies on farm workers to harvest crops, and most of them are harvested by immigrants from Mexico and Central America, and they are all labeled Mexicans. And through the years, Oregon has resisted making it easy for people who are farm laborers and who come to do the hard work. It makes it hard for them to put down roots or settle into communities and stay in the US. When I was in my 20s, I worked for a program that helped Hispanic youth get their GEDs. Hopefully, they could start working to break the cycle of migrant work. And as a part of that, I got to go to a training in Chicago. And it was a very different experience than Oregon. Took a cab from the airport to my hotel. And while I was driving along, I turned to look at the people who were in the cars beside me. They were black. I'd never seen that before. Oh, I had to start thinking about things a little bit differently. You mean not every place is like Oregon? Not everyone shares my experience of how life is? Not everyone's white. Awareness is where we start to open our eyes to the possibility of difference. Not better or worse, just different. Acknowledging difference opens us to the idea of alternatives to our own way of thinking and being. And that it isn't necessarily, again, wrong, it's just different. And I have to start engaging with that and paying attention. And as we learn and consider and experience the other, we can begin to see how different may actually represent something better. There's something there that's more compassionate, perhaps, more humane, more complex than what we had been led to believe. So I got more curious about other. I looked for opportunities to learn more, to explore other cultures and people and ways of being. I'm sure, like many of you on this journey too, you kind of start with food. The times changed too, and others became more aware. Employers I had over the years provided many opportunities to learn through diversity training. I started to put myself in situations where I'd be around people who were not always like me. My partner for 11 years was from Micronesia, and I can tell you that in our discussions and in our conversations, I learned a lot about my American blinders. As we were sitting and watching news one night, I made some comment about something. I don't even remember what it was, but he just turned to me and gave me one of those looks, you know, like, you Americans are so stupid. You believe anything that's on your TV. It was a good lesson. I read different books by authors not like me. I did less assuming and more listening. I made friends with gay and lesbian and trans folks. I became an advocate for fat acceptance, which frankly is my own place of learning about the impacts of discrimination and oppression and body shaming. I worked harder at thinking about engaging my impact instead of merely what I meant to do, my intent. I worked on diverse teams and I made new friends. And as the years passed, my thinking and my understanding changed and grew. I noted changes in my choices and my political ideas and how I went about living my life with a greater awareness of the realities of the impacts of white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism. I got involved in places where I hoped I could be helpful and impact change. I became a Unitarian Universalist and eventually the UU minister you see before you. I realized that I have a responsibility to participate in making reparations for the past and influencing the future to be more just, more equitable, more compassionate, more respectful. I shared with you last week the model from Murray Sinclair, former member of the Canadian Senate, a First Nations lawyer and chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, about the steps required for reconciliation. 1, awareness of the harm done. We can't fix what we can't acknowledge. 2, acceptance of our role in it, understanding what we have gained because we have been a part. An apology for wrongs committed. Action to correct the consequences and change behavior. And lastly, respect, respect, respect. Now that model is applicable at many levels. The scale of the harm done must align with the scale of reparations that are made. And be it interpersonal or institutional, the amends are going to look different, but still be required to make whole the people harmed. I believe that these steps are now the work that we must take on within our congregations, individually and collectively. And I know that this congregation has begun to move in that direction and make inroads and try to be friendly and get to know people in our new neighborhood of Oakwood Vaughan, as well as in the Indigenous community. We have more work to do. We must be brave enough to talk about issues and engage in the dialogue. And I expect that it will be hugely challenging and occasionally incredibly painful. I know we will not follow a linear path to wholeness, but we'll stumble and have to forgive ourselves and each other over and over and over again. That's why love, that concept that we keep hearing about in our sermons, at least sermons from me, that's why love is so important at the center of our faith. We will have to love each other and ourselves enough to stick together and try again and again. It's so easy to just say, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too hard. It hurts. I'm taking my stuff and I'm out of here. That is a privilege we cannot afford. When we stick together, we can solve problems, even when it's hard. And then we can celebrate when we do something well and experience a transition in our ways of being. In the words of Beverly Daniel Tatum, to work for a just society requires 2 tasks: the abandonment of our individual racism and the recognition of and opposition to institutional and cultural racism. No one expects you to be perfect, except perhaps yourself. So make your efforts from your good intent and carefully consider the potential impacts of what you choose to do. If it doesn't go the way you hoped, be strong enough and prepared to say, I'm sorry. What can I do better? It takes a good bit of humility to change your mind and change your life and change your behavior. Keep up the good work. Be neither careless nor a coward with this new adventure. I've heard it said that there are only 2 ways to face the future: with love or with fear. I'm going to encourage you to choose love every single time. for many reasons, but mostly because fear is just too great a burden to bear. Make your life a testament to your living faith, to your commitment to change the world, a bit at a time. A bit at a time. Changing yourself first. UU is an action-based faith. It isn't enough to believe something. We value deeds, not simply creeds. So what we do is learn from our history, experience our reactions and feelings, and use our new understandings and commitment to propel ourselves toward creating a more healed world. Let's start here. And there are risks, and we won't always get it right. And we won't always live our values perfectly, but we can make the commitment and make the effort a little bit more and more every day. I know it's a lot to ask, but the world needs nothing less. Amen.